Finally stop the overpopulation Earth, for it is suffering and perishing miserably.
The following are some words addressed to the masses of humanity and their machinations, which should be listed once and named to the human beings of the earth, so that they may have their eyes opened. All the suffering ecosystems, nature and its fauna and flora, the waters, forests, landscapes and the sky shall he see, learn to feel the atmosphere and its breathing air, perceive the climate, open his mind and let his reason play. All this is to be brought before his eyes with the following words and told into his world of thought for reconsideration and right action, so that he may learn to see life as it really and truly is and as he himself works and lives. Overpopulation is the greatest evil of Earth human beings, but hardly any earthling thinks about what this means for the Earth and all life, especially not about the fact that it causes all the mad, conscienceless Earth human being machinations and all the rampant, devastating, destructive, and in some cases also exterminating many genera as well as species of the environment, which destroys life in the world, and in time makes it completely impossible. That industry is a factor of environmental pollution worldwide is beyond question, but how mankind itself in the same form as overpopulation creates an enormous amount of waste and simply throws and disposes of it irresponsibly, thoughtlessly, indifferently and carelessly in the open nature, that is what the average citizen does not want to see, know and understand. However, no one except the nature conservationists talks about the fact that they represent the factor that burdens the landscapes, moors, fields, floodplains and meadows, the forests and swamps in their life function to the point of no return. The same is true for ordinary citizens, as it is the case in industry, that countless tons of waste are irresponsibly disposed of by human beings in the world, also in the waters, in the streams, lakes and rivers, which then wash all the rubbish and mass into the oceans, mainly plastics, which take up to 1 or 2 centuries to decompose completely. The fish and other creatures are then harmed by these. They eat the waste and die miserably. And the majority of humanity, precisely the overpopulation, the really guilty ones who cause it all, do not feel the least bit guilty about it. Also, hardly any human beings give any serious thought to the fact that in the countryside countless animals, countless creatures and other living beings of the world, including the plant world, are harmed in their health and perish as a result of the carelessly discarded waste into the world. Carelessly discarded rubbish and waste not only kills living creatures of all species and types, but they also die miserably and are even wiped out. More than 1,000 species and types every year, which will never live on Earth again. Human beings who do not really think, that is to say stupid ones' stupidity, is nothing other than a failure to think and has nothing to do with the fact that the human being in question, who is just stupid, is consciously impaired in their stupidity, that is to say in their blatant failure to think, give no thought whatsoever to what their heedless, irresponsible, as well as their roaring indifferent actions cause when they simply throw away their rubbish and waste consciencelessly and irresponsibly instead of disposing of it properly at a cost in accordance with the rubbish and waste ordinances. There is always enough money for the acquisition and possession of nonsense, luxuries, parties, pleasures, holidays, sporting events, and so on, and it is spent en masse. Every earthling has enough for this, and even horrendous debts are incurred for it, but when it comes to protecting order and cleanliness as well as the vital nature and its fauna and flora, as well as all ecosystems in general, including the atmosphere and the climate, then every expenditure of money, no matter how small, is so much that nothing is spent on it. No. Then the rubbish and waste is simply thrown away unconscionably, irresponsibly and carelessly in the open countryside because it costs nothing and certainly no money. In their stupidity, the majority of the overpopulation does not feel bad about the fact that with their irresponsible actions of environmental pollution, as well as by not doing the correct thing, they are not only destroying free nature, its fauna and flora, and whipping out many things for all time, but are also destroying more and more all the foundations that make their own lives and those of their descendants and the whole future possible. That in the whole of all the destruction of nature and its fauna and flora, the poisoning of the atmosphere and the violent alteration of the climate by greenhouse gases and poisons of all kinds, to which is also added the extermination of natural life forms which hardly anyone gives a thought to, is a fact that rarely any human being cares about. The fact that all life is being poisoned and that, as a result, human beings are being struck with cancer and other diseases, epidemics and pandemics, is just as much the pure truth as the further fact that, as a result of the inexorable further increase in mass overpopulation, human beings are becoming more and more indifferent, unloving and foreign to their fellow human beings. Apart from this, it is also frightening to realize that the human beings of the earth are becoming more and more ignorant, uneducated and stupid or non-thinking, and in addition, psychologically more and more susceptible and more dependent and addicted to pleasure, holidays, sports and electronics. Consequently, he loses more and more control over himself and becomes the good meal for the soul-catching of the religionists and the belief in God, whereby he no longer thinks for himself at all, but only delusionally fantasizes about the lies of those religionists who promise him all the glory in heaven. The atmosphere is polluted with poisons, mainly by the enormous pollution of industry in the form of toxic fumes from the chimneys, and the manufacture of products that are increasingly needed due to overpopulation. Then there is the whole agronomy, which is a chapter of its own in terms of artificial fertilizers which deplete the soil and only bring growth through what fertilizers are added to it. Livestock farming is also to be mentioned, the mass keeping of cattle for meat production for the mass of human beings, from which billions of tons of methane gas escape into the atmosphere every day. A cow alone produces around 300 liters of methane gas per day through digestion, about which only a few human beings give the slightest thought. Also to be mentioned are the livestock farms and the larger-scale poultry farms, and so on, as well as the larger-scale market gardens, all of which use vast quantities of artificial feed, artificial fertilizers and poisons of all kinds, and thus pollute the atmosphere, because parts of it, even tons of it, get into it every day. But hardly anyone talks about this, namely only those few who really care, but explain everything in vain and appeal to the understanding and reason of the earthlings, talking themselves hoarse and as if into the desert, where the wind carries away every word unheard. The fact that all the above-mentioned machinations of overpopulation have a negative impact on the climate and cause it tremendous damage is not all, for there is also the matter of carbon dioxide emissions, which are caused by the billions of private and business motor vehicles and working machines that are used 24 hours a day. These are powered by explosion engines, the end product of the Earth's petroleum, which in the form of petrol and diesel oil produces carbon dioxide emissions that pollute both the atmosphere and the air we breathe and can no longer be absorbed by trees, because the forests are thoughtlessly, irresponsibly, and criminally cut down, burnt down and cleared, partly in order to gain new land, which, however, is exhausted after only 2 years. This is because the forest soil is only fertile to a depth of about 30 centimeters and quickly loses its fertility when deprived of trees. The whole issue of carbon dioxide, along with many other greenhouse gases, which inevitably damage the climate and inexorably promote its change in such a way that natural disasters of all kinds are the inevitable result, is not taken into account. Droughts and the melting of glaciers and poles, as well as all kinds of natural disasters, primeval storms and tempests, enormous rainfall with great floods, mudslides, massive landslides, and equally violent tsunamis with the resulting destruction of seashores and land adjacent to the sea, as well as the loss of residential areas and countless deaths, and also the increasing number of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, which are becoming precarious in their severity, are the inevitable consequences. That industry is a product of overpopulation, and this is to be understood in the sense that the greater the overpopulation, the more industry is required, consists in the fact that industry grows in accordance with the increase in overpopulation and thus accordingly creates more and more environmental pollution through exhaust gases of all kinds. Neither the scientists nor the ordinary people give the slightest thought to this, yet they rail against the pollution of the environment by industry, without seeing and researching the reason why industry exists in the first place, who needs it and why, and who is the culprit in the first place, that it is becoming more and more extensive and throwing more and more filth into the atmosphere. The truth is that the more humanity grows in numbers, the more industry grows, because in relation to the growth of humanity or overpopulation, industry inevitably grows too. This is because all the machinations of overpopulation increase in an endless way, respectively because the needs, the desires, the wishes and the craving for luxury increase to a degree that can only be fulfilled by companies, corporations and private individuals. Companies, corporations and private individuals therefore fulfill everything and earn themselves silly in the process by being the implementers of all the machinations of human beings, which become more and more the more earthlings there are. The companies, corporations and private individuals produce still, and thereby fulfill the machinations of overpopulation. The needs, desires, wishes and luxuries for which the human beings are crying out. The fact that they use other companies, corporations and private individuals for the raw materials they need, who exploit the earth with all possible means by mining, digging and robbing its resources, thus destroying it and rendering it unable to exist, is neither thought of, let alone responsibility taken for it, because it is only the earth that is being made a pig of. In no way does the thought or the idea ever arise in an earthling that the planet Earth is a life form like any other, only differently formed in its kind but still a life form that lives. And it is alive, be it with its entire interior, with its innermost iron crystal center, with its constantly moving layers that trigger quakes, and with its magma glowing in the Earth's interior, seething and holding the fate of the planet, appearing as glowing lava when it is ejected by volcanism. But there are also many kinds of waters with all their life forms, then also the surface of the Earth with all the different landscapes, nature, and all its fauna and flora, the wind and clouds, the weather conditions, the atmosphere and the climate, and so on, all of which live and maintain this. The human beings of the earth should think of this for once.
Samyase Silver Star Center, November 5, 2021, 11:27 a.m. Billy.